Imagine a life stretched across continents, languages, and systems. Returning home with a wider lens, what would you put into practice?
And I've had the wonderful opportunity of living most of my life overseas.
After years in Japan, China, and South America, engineer turned polyglot Evan Jaqua founded the Solutions Party to apply a global perspective to local problems. What did he learn? Connection trumps division.
After all the heated arguing, we could still go and eat dinner together because even though we all had different points of view, we all wanted the same thing, freedom and prosperity. And that's what we've got to get back to.
And he recognized patterns, the kind you see in authoritarian systems. Positions are corrupted when holding office becomes the point.
What turns them and so many others into vicious, literally mass-murdering monsters is their addiction to power.
What you experience overseas stays with you. It shapes how you see the world and solve problems. Witnessing closed-minded systems made Evan double down on open debate and broad-based solutions at home.
From having lived in a communist country where only one idea, one point of view is allowed, our greatest strength is the diversity of our opinions, our freedom of thought, and we should celebrate, not demonize that.
While many are leaving, Evan is staying to turn perspective into practice.
I am not really that in favor of this idea of leaving the country to just get away.
Leave or stay, let your thoughts, words, and actions carry the lessons.
What really matters in life are the richness of your experiences.
Evan wants change, and he's leading with ideas forged from real conversations with people from all over the world. So, what has a life abroad taught Evan about real solutions for a troubled world?
Holy crap, this is like a massive issue, and it's like, what do you do to turn that around?
Exactly. I think.
Evan, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on. It's nice to meet you.
Well, likewise, I'm so happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this since you reached out, and we got this arranged. So I've been, like I say, looking forward to this conversation.
This isn't a political podcast, but honestly, every single episode I record, it creeps in somehow. I think just with everything that's going on in the US and the world today, everybody's got a little something to say on it. And you obviously have probably more than just a little something to say on it, coming from, a specific political viewpoint and political movement. Could you just explain to listeners what the Solution Party is all about, and what changes you look to see occur in the U.S.?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, it kind of dovetails into the main focus of your podcast, which is living abroad. And I've had the wonderful opportunity of living most of my life, I would actually say, overseas. I lived many years in Japan, got my graduate degree there, worked there with a Japanese company, did business there. And so I feel like Japan is like my second country. And then I've been living in South America for the last 20 years, mainly. And then I lived in China not too long after the Tiananmen Square incident. And, these overseas experiences have been extremely valuable, not only from the cultural point of view, not only from the religious, but to seeing the common problems that people around the world face, whether we're talking about, people who live in a despotic country like China, or in a democracy like us, or in a country like, Peru. And a lot of the ideas of the Solutions Party, and I'd like to take credit for the ideas, but really actually they're ideas that have come into being through lots of discussions with people around the world. And it basically comes down to a very, very fundamental idea. And the fundamental idea is this, is that the human brain is a wonderful thing. But one of the weaknesses of the human brain is the ease with which it can develop addictions. We can develop addictions to drugs, to video games, to social media, to junk food, to gambling. But probably the most addictive thing of all is power. And once people get power, they don't want to give it up, and they will do pretty much anything to keep it. And, we see, I like to say, Vladimir Putin would probably be a pretty nice guy if he were painting houses outside of Moscow, had a little business. But, instead of that, he's, you imagine going out to a beer with Vladimir Putin, the house painter, having a beer, you'd probably have a pretty fun discussion. But, what does he do? He rigs elections, kills political opponents, invades neighboring countries. Or Kim Jong-un, the North Korean dictator, I mean, I like to say, well, if you were running an Airbnb in Hawaii and surfing every day, it'd probably be a lot different guy than the one who sends entire families to gruesome prison camps. And the same thing with Nicolas Maduro, who used to be a bus driver in Venezuela. He'd probably be a pretty nice guy, if he were still a bus driver. But what turns them and so many others into vicious, literally mass murdering monsters is their addiction to power. And this addiction afflicts our own politicians. That's why they put their own political careers and their own partisan interest above everything. How often have you heard, well, this politician is not up for reelection, so he can vote his conscience. And you think, well, gosh, shouldn't they always be voting their conscience? Why is it first priority when it comes to making a decision is how it's going to affect my reelection prospects, or how's it going to affect my party's ability to keep control of the House? Well, and it also is the reason why they spend almost half their time just in campaign mode, raising funds for their next election or participating in political rallies. And if you hired me on a 4-year contract to do some work for you, and I spent half the time just lobbying you and your colleagues for an extension of the contract, you probably wouldn't be very happy. And that's exactly what we have now. And so the very fundamental idea is one that I have come up with in my discussions with people, is that probably the best way is that if I had to give you a very highly addictive medication, the way to do it, to ensure that you wouldn't get addicted, is to give it small portions spaced apart. And that's exactly how power has to be allocated. A one-time portion, there's no chance for re-election. You can't even run for another office while you're currently serving. So 100% of your time is dedicated to doing your work, and there is no re-election considerations when you make decisions. So that way you can go in there and actually make courageous decisions based on what you think is best, rather than what you think is going to win the election. And that's just one thing. I proposed reforming the very idea of political parties, because they become tribal, and the interests of the party become the priority. Fundamentally reforming our journalism, because our journalism is in a very sorry state, and that's one of the reasons why our country is in a sorry state. So these are a whole bunch of ideas, but the whole point I want to emphasize is that these come from uh, different experiences, talking with different people, and from having lived in a communist country where only one idea, one point of view is allowed. And our greatest strength is the diversity of our opinions, our freedom of thought. And we should celebrate that, not demonize that. And I think once you get the emotions out of the picture, once you get the tribalism out of the picture, our democracy and our economy can really function according to its majestic potential. So again, I know you're not normally a political podcast, and that's great. That's fine. I don't want to necessarily cause the discussion to deviate too much into politics, but it does tie very deeply back to my overseas experiences that I mentioned.
Yeah, no, and for sure. And like I said, it literally, Evie, so this is episode 9. I think every single episode, the current state in the US has come in. Every guest mentions it in some way, shape, or form. And it's pretty big right now too, in the kind of expat community on platforms like Substack and stuff. Everybody's talking about leaving. And it's even, I had a guest on, he's the synonymous William A. Finnegan. He actually has a theory that he's termed the Great American Exodus, and he thinks that there's going to be a massive outpouring from the U.S. Into the world because of the current state of politics in the U.S. Is this something that you've seen that you would agree with? And I guess in part of his theory is that it's going to be a massive case of capital flight. So like all this money is going to leave and go into other countries who are looking for IP and successful business people to set up in their other countries.
Yeah, well, I like, for example, I know a lot of people who are thinking precisely that. I I think it's wonderful to live overseas. I love living overseas. It really helps you appreciate life in a different way, because you see the world from a different perspective, and you get out of your comfort zone, and you have to deal with the challenges of the language, deal with the challenges of the cultural differences, but that makes you better as a person. And I want to just mention one thing about some of the things that we're going through. One of the things that I like to tell people is that I actually went to a small, liberal arts college, and it was liberal in every sense of the word. And I was a young Republican. I just gotten through voting for Proposition 13 California. I was staunchly anti-Soviet, very pro-capitalist, and I got into a lot of emotionally charged discussions with my fellow students. But I can tell you this: after all the heated arguing, after all the intense debating, after all the points and counterpoints have been made, we could still go and eat dinner together. We could go have lunch together. We could go get coffee together, study together, laugh together. Because even though we all had different points of view, we all understood that we had, the best interests at heart. We all wanted the same thing: freedom and prosperity. And that's what we've got to get back to, is to where, see, I think that if we self-segregate, whether it's in blue zones or red zones, or we just leave the country, I don't really think that's a solution. These people who think that, for example, well, we should divorce the country, blue zones and red zones. Well, the key point is that people have always disagreed, and they always will disagree. The key point is, how do you handle those disagreements? Now, in the old days, they would sharpen the spears, they would sharpen the swords, and they'd go at it, and the best band of brawlers won. And they finally figured out, after millennia of doing that wasn't the best way to do things. When you discuss the different ideas and then you vote on them, that's the best way to move things forward. And we got to get back to that. And so I am not really that in favor of this idea of escaping, or leaving the country to just get away from all. I mean, it's a perfectly good reason. I know I personally would rather it be for a little more positive reason than just wanting to get the hell out of this madhouse that we're living in. And it is. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And like my older daughter, she lives in Germany, and she's happy as can be. She's traveling around. It's not the craziness that we have here in our country, but as Winston Churchill said, Americans always do the right thing after they've done everything else. And so, I believe that this terrible time is we're going to be wrestling with it. But I think that if we, believe in the fundamental idea of democracy, and understand that separating ourselves from people we disagree with is not a solution. That just postpones, disagreements with others down the road. Yeah, that we've got to kind of sit back, step back, take the emotions out of the picture, get the rancor and the anger and the hatred that is so plaguing us. And which is, by the way, anger and hatred are two emotions that are also very addictive. But living overseas, like I say, if it's for retiring, or you just want to have an experience, get to know different languages and cultures, yeah, that's great. But I would prefer people that wouldn't be leaving the country, in this, I got to get the hell out of this, for a little more positive reasons than that.
Yeah, fair enough, for sure. Yeah, it seems to be what a lot of people are talking about for the reasons these days. And but what first took you overseas? And you've mentioned quite a few countries and places you live. So then, what kept you out there? And then, what finally brought you home? I guess a little bit of a 3-part question.
That's great. I've actually, I studied math and physics in college, and I really believe that I didn't have any ability for languages. Because I went to a small liberal arts school, the only overseas, Lewis and Clark, where I went, had a wonderful, and still does, I believe, a wonderful overseas program. But the only one I could take advantage of was to Costa Rica, because I could only go during the summer. So I thought, okay, well, that was kind of an exotic place at the time. Not a lot of people went to Costa Rica. Not even many people hadn't even heard of it. And so I went to Costa Rica and I was going to be there for 10 weeks to study Spanish. It was sort of an overseas language program. And I thought, yeah, what the heck? And, I was, like I said, I was a SPAT math and physics major, but I can tell you, I was the challenge of learning the language in a place where nobody spoke English. And so I would try to say these sentences and I would put them together in my mind and then I wouldn't understand the responses. And it was just, I intensely tired at the end of each day. But I found shortly before I left, after 10 weeks, almost after 10 weeks, I found myself sitting around a dinner table once discussing, having a conversation with some locals. And I suddenly realized I'm speaking this language. I'm actually speaking and understanding this language. I couldn't believe it. And so that sort of planted the seed. And then once I got back to the US and continued my studies at the university or at the college, I started making friends with Spanish speakers. When I got my job, I started making friends with other Spanish speakers, had a girlfriend who was a Spanish speaker. And I started to feel a passion for it. And I lived with a Latin American family when I was in Portland, and became very close to them. And so I actually got pretty good, very good at Spanish. I realized I actually did have some ability. But once that seed was planted, I wanted to learn another language. And so I thought, I was an engineer at the time, and I thought, well, what would be really a challenge would be Japanese. And so I was working at a company, designing what are called cathode ray tubes, which used to be the old television-like tubes,
Mm-hmm.
but I knew that didn't have much future. It was fascinating, but I knew it didn't have much future. So my idea was to go to Japan, spend a year, learn the language, come back and get my master's degree in computer science. Well, I got over there, I was studying the language, and I met a professor at a local university who was in a branch of computer science that I wanted to get into. And before I knew it, I was getting my graduate degree in Japan, in Japanese, by the way.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, but let me say, when you're studying a technical subject, you have a lot of advantages because there's no cultural um, nuances involved. Whether you're just studying programming language, it's the same whether you're talking about English or Japanese. Of course, the descriptions are in Japanese, but it's technical jargon and the technical jargon. And so that was actually a good stepping stone
Hmm.
to learning the language. And so, yeah. And then I met a Chinese woman, lived in China. And so, yeah, I got into these, learning languages and really living the culture. And, you know, what I, what I've told my daughters, and this, I guess, is the driving behind it all more than anything, is that what really matters in life are the richness of your experiences, not the amount of stuff you accumulate. And living overseas, learning languages, getting to know people from different cultures. It's really, it's like you're savoring the buffet of life, and it's really opens up your horizons. You deal with the differences, but that makes you better. That makes you stronger.
Yeah,
So
it's a theme that pops up actually quite a bit. It's like you don't know what you don't know. So like when you go out there, you have no idea like what opportunities, will present themselves to you. And I think like your story here sounds like, a perfect example of that. Like you went over and then, South America led to Japan, Japan led to China. And it's like you would probably never have like thought to like, oh, I'm gonna plan like this whole thing other than the fact that like I want to go to Japan. But after that, it's like you don't really know, right? And those considering those things can be scary at times, but like if you just take that leap, it just opens doors. My previous
it
guest,
really
he's been in
does.
Dubai for 14 years, and yeah, he just went out on a whim. He replied to a Facebook like job post, and then he ended
Uh-huh.
up out in Dubai, and yeah, he's been there ever since, and he absolutely loves it. Um, was there like a single, oh wow, I've been assuming wrong about a certain culture, whether it was in Japan, China, South America, and like how that changed your
Well,
prior beliefs?
I can tell you something that was very difficult from the language point of view is that I learned Spanish And then I went to Japan. And the Spanish and English actually have one heck of a lot in common compared to Japanese. And so I went to Japan with even deeper preconceptions of how a language should work. Because, I had English, and that was the reinforcement of how language works from the lots of similarities. And so that really made it harder to unlearn that to learn Japanese, because Japanese, it really is such a completely different language that uh, it, it really it made it harder. So yeah, that was one thing that I noticed, was that learning the Spanish, which I thought was going to help me learn Japanese even better. I thought, well, that you learn one language, the third one should be easier, but that actually made it more difficult because. And then Chinese actually though was quite a lot easier than Japanese, because Chinese grammar is actually very similar to English grammar, and
Oh,
so yeah, it really is. You've heard long time no see. Well, that's an exact translation from Chinese, which I'm convinced came from Chinese immigrants, because in Chinese it's hao zhou bu jian, which is literally long time no see.
hmm.
And yeah, things and the grammar is very much similar, which is why Chinese tend to learn English much more quickly than Japanese do, because the grammar is much more similar with English than it
Oh.
is, yeah, it's much harder for I think for Japanese to learn English, just like it's much harder for us to learn Japanese as opposed to Chinese.
Oh, interesting. I've never. I studied China and Japan and stuff in university, but never really the languages. So I never knew that. That's super interesting. And I actually had a question I was going to ask like later on about idioms from another country, and if there's any that you use. But long time no see. That's probably
Well,
fits that category.
actually, I will say, yeah, I bought a dictionary many years ago of Japanese idioms, and I've gone through that a lot. So yeah, a lot of Japanese are actually pretty amazed by the number of idioms I know, because it's a lot of fun because these idioms are sometimes really, just fascinating. For example, a Japanese idiom is for petering out. Something that starts off great and then peters out. Like the New York Mets. They were doing just great and then they petered out. Well, the expression in Japanese is the head of a dragon and the tail of a snake.
Mm,
So it starts off with this tremendous head of a dragon, and it ends up with just the tail of a snake. And
that's
so,
great.
yeah, and then there's another one, like caught between a rock and a hard spot in Japanese. One of the ways to say it, well, the front door there's a tiger, and the back door there's a wolf. And so, yeah, these just really really interesting. And then some expressions are amazingly seem like direct translations, like "kill two birds with one stone." There's literally exact translation of that, an idiom of that in Japanese, and you wonder. Iseki nicho is the expression in Japanese, and you wonder, iseki means one rock, and nicho means two birds, and
Hmm.
you kind of wonder. And also for the tip of the iceberg, there's a direct idiom for that too, exactly the same, tip of. Well, actually, it's one corner of an iceberg if you were to translate it
Hmm.
literally. But you see these things, and gosh, is that like just coincidence, or how in the world do we, two cultures so completely different, have and Spanish too has that exact same expression, by the way, kill, matar dos pájaros de un tiro, kill two birds with one. It's just amazing how these, you wonder, did somebody, learn this like in English, or did we learn it from Japanese, or was it just pure coincidence that these expressions just evolved independently?
Yeah. Or is it so old that when at some point when we all shared a common language, before all the language
Yeah.
groups split off, is it so old that we
Yes.
just carried it with us, and then all the different language groups just came up with their own version of it, but it was always something that we just said or something.
Yeah. Yeah, but then you wonder, like, well, if our ancestors, our distant ancestors came from Africa, how in the world would they have come up with tip of the iceberg?
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
Yeah.
unless they went sailing, who knows? But yeah, it's really, really interesting. But besides that, what's the amazing thing is just how you see how much commonality we all have, despite the different cultures, despite the different languages. And of course, the cultural differences are there, but the fundamental that define us humans are really, really, so much in common. And this is something that I think you come to really appreciate, and you realize and appreciate when you did interact with people who have a different cultural perspective.
So I mean, it's fascinating, like the places that you've lived, and and you've the languages that you've learned, and just listening to you speak, you've really gained a fluency, which is incredible.
I was just going to say, the most important thing when it comes to languages is you have to have a passion for it, and just perseverance. It's not so much talent as it is, just sticking with it and having a passion for it, and not worrying about making mistakes. If you make a mistake and somebody corrects you, you don't need to, try not to feel defensive or hurt. Take it as uh, something to appreciate. Even every time I would make mistakes, and I've made probably as many mistakes as there are stars in the universe. you know, uh, but when people would correct me, I would really and sincerely appreciate it. And, it's okay not to be perfect, because most native speakers also make mistakes, by the way. It's not like anybody, I hear people making mistakes all the time in English, Japanese, Spanish, Chinese, the pronunciation, people outside of Beijing butcher the pronunciations. So, you don't understand when a joke somebody says, just ask them to explain. I didn't quite get it. I'm glad you guys found it funny, but could you explain it to me, type of thing. You want to try to do your best, but you don't have to be too much of a perfectionist. And it's a challenge. It really is. But it's really, again, not so much about talent as it is about just perseverance and passion, as I would say.
Yeah, that's great advice, and yeah, not to take it personally. Just kind of like have
Yeah,
fun with it, or else it's like it's not worth learning, really, right? If you can't
exactly.
enjoy it.
And the one other piece of advice I would give when it comes to learning languages, it's like, think of a painter. If you took me and you took Picasso, you know, Picasso could make a great painting with just two colors, black and white. You could give me color after color after color, give me hundreds of colors, but each new color, I'm not going to be able to make a better picture. The same thing applies with vocabulary. If you get good at a very basic set of vocabulary, learn the grammar, then you incorporate more words. The
Mm.
temptation is to try to learn more and more words, but if you don't have a good command of the grammar, it's like being a painter who has lots of colors but doesn't know the basics of how to paint.
Mm.
You're making sense.
Yeah, no,
And
it's a great
so
analogy. Yeah.
a great painter can make a great work of art with just a few colors. And the same thing when it comes to speaking languages. If you can learn to manipulate a limited vocabulary, get that grammar down, then after you've gotten that down, then start taking in more vocabulary. Just like once you get the painting techniques down, then start adding more colors. I think it's a very apt analogy. So, avoid the temptation just to keep learning more and more words, but concentrate on getting the grammar down on a very limited vocabulary, and then going from there.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great advice. And I was doing that Duolingo a little while back for Spanish, and honestly, I think that's I ended up after 6 months. It's not like a huge demand here to learn how to speak Spanish in Belize, because English is the first language. So it was more, I was just trying to kind of just expand my brain a little bit, and and I did sort of fall off the wagon on it. But I did find it was like the app was just pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing like words, and it gets to be kind of crazy at times. And there's really no way in that app to be like, okay, just pause on this for a bit. I mean, I suppose I could go back and redo sessions, but it's definitely something that I'm interested in, and I'll probably pick up again at some point. But yeah, at the moment, there's lots of other things vying for my attention, and it's just, yeah, I just
I
kind of
get
had
it.
to set it aside. And again, it's not like pressing for here, right?
Sure.
Belize, there's a lot of Spanish speakers here, but
What part? I'm sorry. What part of the country are you in?
I'm in the south, so I'm in Stan Creek district. It's sort of like middle south of the country in Belize. So and it's right on the coast. So it's very very Caribbean. English is the main language, and then there's Creole and Spanish. And then there's lots of other cultures here and stuff too. There's Taiwanese and there's Mennonites. So the Mennonites have their own language.
Uh,
Pleiss Dutch or something like that it's called. I'd probably butchered that word, but yeah. And then, like I said, there's Taiwanese and there's Lebanese. There's lots of different people here. So there's lots of languages, but the main one is English, and then the others are essentially Spanish and Creole. And yeah, Creole is a hard one to learn too, because you really have to be in with you kind of have to almost grow up, I feel like, with it to
right.
really understand it. Otherwise, you have to be really well immersed into like the Garifuna culture, or just in a village setting with a lot of locals who speak it kind of. And it's like maybe like a bridge language too, because like all the different cultural groups here will speak it to each other.
Okay.
And then often they'll just turn to like me or something, and they'll just speak English, even though Creole is sort of it's like an English based language, but it's very, yeah, it's hard to sort of explain exactly,
It's
what
like
is
listening to somebody from rural northern Scotland or something, maybe,
yeah, it is. It's very heavily accented,
Yeah,
and then they just have these short forms for words and sort of like blending of words together, like common words. I believe there's one that's like this is my favorite, or this is the favorite. You would say this is the fiwi. That's like, I don't even know if that's
well,
100% right, but there's like a chicken brand here called this the Fiwi chicken. So like this is the favorite chicken. And they also have it like a written version of the language too, and it's pretty much written like in like not in phonetics, but like how you would phonetically write it in English. So it's when you see it written
interesting.
too, it's interesting.
Well,
Yeah,
the
so
good thing
it's been
about,
cool being here and seeing that, and
yeah,
learning about these different cultures and stuff like that too, because it yeah, I mean, I didn't really know too much about Creole culture and stuff like that here until, yeah, I really kind of was exposed to the language, and then yeah, it's quite interesting.
well, how's the cost of living there? I'm just curious.
It ranges. I actually did a cost of living study. When was that? Beginning of this year, late last year, beginning of this year. I polled a whole bunch of foreigners here. I got about 100 respondents, and so it was just like a wide range. So you can live very inexpensively if you say own your own home. It's a modest home. You don't run air conditioning. You live in a more like local village. And you're going to the local grocery stores and the local produce stands and buying all your food that way. And electricity is really expensive, so if you don't have AC, that really cuts down on your bill every month. So it varies. Some people spent 2,000 US a month. Other people spent $10,000-15,000 a month. If you live by the sea in a big house with 6 ACs in it, and you're going out every week to eat out, and you're doing island trips and all that kind of stuff, and you own a boat or something, it's going to be your
Okay,
expenses are going to be through the roof. So generally speaking, most, like, a lot of people come here thinking it's going to be cheap, and then they try to kind of import their
right.
Western lifestyle, and then they get kind of like sticker shock, because they're like, "What? This is not really any cheaper than living at home." The one thing I would say here is, at least when we purchased our land, it was way more affordable to buy land here than it was in Canada. Especially being the
Okay,
proximity to the sea. Like, I can stand out on my deck and I can see the Caribbean Sea. I wouldn't be able to get anywhere near a body of water in Ontario, where I came from, for under $1 million essentially, right?
Right.
And here it was like a fraction of the cost. It was just a lot. We had to build a house, but even still, even all said and done, we were way under the cost of what just a regular old house in, some subdivision in Canada would cost. So that has changed now in the last 3.5 years. The property values have like just gone through the roof. So probably now you're not really, I guess the trade-off would be you could still get a decent sized house really close to the Caribbean Sea for like a similar price that you would back home. So it's like you could trade your residential life for like a beach life if you wanted to, kind of for the same cost. And then if you can work remotely, you can bring your job here, and then there are ways to kind of rein in some of your spending, but you just have to kind of understand, what you're trying to do. And there's local options for a lot of stuff. People want, their Doritos, right? Or you can just buy the local version for a quarter of the price, kind of thing. Like, right, there's stuff like that, right? I mean, no one should probably really eat any of that stuff, but it's
Right.
that's
Yeah, I get it.
I guess.
Okay. Well, yeah, because
So that's a long answer. Yeah, so it's just really, it varies. It's like you can live cheaply if you want. You can live off grid in the jungle or something and not have solar, and use an outhouse and cook on a fire. And there's lots of people here that live that way, locals and foreigners. And so yeah, you can get your costs down to like very, very little in a situation like that. But again, there's a trade-off. You're living a very different life than what you would have normally been used to in North America or in the West.
Right. Well, I know, like, if in like you got to live in a city like Tokyo, one of the things you're probably going to have to get used to is living in a very reduced space, because Tokyo is just so very incredibly. But you know that's actually, if you can learn to live in a reduced space, but and learn to live with fewer things, that actually makes a big difference. So I always tell people, you have a choice between location and space. Always choose location. It's much better, living in a location where you can live your life comfortably without a lot of inconveniences. Uh, for example, if you live in a place that's bigger, but you're going to spend a lot of time on the train, or commuting, or to go shopping, it's going to require you use a vehicle. Then you might end up losing a lot of time each day just getting around. But if you live in a very central location, then you can save a lot of time, and spend more time living your life instead of I tell my daughters, less time you can spend in a vehicle, the happier you're going to be. And so if you can orient your life so that you're spending less time, you know, uh, just moving yourself from one part of the city or whatever to the other, you're going to be happier because you're going to have more time. Time is the most important thing, because time, once it's gone, you never get it back. But space can be managed if you learn to just live efficiently, not accumulate or something, which is one of the things that I did, is that I lived for a number of years, 180 square foot apartment in Tokyo, but I loved it. It was right in the middle of the city. I could just, ride my bike to work. I could, had everything just within walking distance. If I needed to go somewhere, I had trains galore to use. And I was much happier there than when I first got to Tokyo. Somebody recommended, no, you want a bigger space, go live out in this, what's called a bed town. And I was miserable because I spent at least 4 hours each day just traveling around in trains to get, to school or to get to work or whatever. And so that was one of the big lessons I learned. If you can live with fewer things, but concentrating on having more time and using that time to experience things, whether it's just going out with friends, having time, or going out for that run, or going to that bookstore, the coffee shop. The more time you have to enjoy life, it's going to make things it's going to make things better. So when it comes to time versus space, always choose priority to giving to living your life where you're not losing a lot of time doing unuseful things like just commuting.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That was one of the big reasons why we wanted to move, was just to sort of break free from the like endless commutes. I was a contractor back in Canada, like a general contractor in construction, and I would just spend, and like I lived in one of the most populated places in Canada, and the traffic was just atrocious, and I'd spend hours a day, like 2 hours each way easily. And then if I'm doing any time running materials and stuff in the middle of the day, it was like 5-6 hours a day in the car, and it was just
Oh
the
yeah,
biggest, what felt like the biggest waste of time. And I've definitely recaptured all of that time here, by coming here, because I no longer work in that industry. And the most time I spend is maybe about an hour in the entire day driving my kids to school and back, because there's no like real public transportation and stuff here where I live. So I have to do the driving, or we have to take our kids ourselves. But even still, like, it pales in comparison to how much time I would sit and have to deal with just traffic. And I do not miss that. I was just having a conversation with somebody. There's hitchhiking, because public transportation is not great here. Hitchhiking is still a real thing. So I picked somebody up there the other day, and he got in the car, and and he's a local guy, and we were just talking about this. And what did he say? He's like, Belize is a place where you can come to think, because you have so much more time.
yeah,
And I definitely agreed with him. And it's really important, I think, for like quality of life. It's just, to like be able to
yeah,
do. And even in some place like in Japan, where you can sit on a train, you can still like capture that time, right? Because you can read, you can study a language, you could, there's lots of things you
right.
can do while on a train, compared to just like driving a vehicle yourself. But even still, even being close and walking distance, being able to bike like that, that is, I think is huge for quality of life and
Yeah.
recapturing your time.
But that's how I've oriented my life in Peru too. I actually have an apartment in Peru and my office in Peru, but I can run from my apartment to my office. It's about 3 kilometers. And so I can kill two birds with one stone. I can get some exercise in and get to my office faster than I would, by the way, in a taxi or a car, because you just get stuck in traffic. And so, like in my older daughter, she was living in the Bay Area before she moved to Germany. She followed my example. She got her master's degree in Germany in economics. But before that, she was spending 4 hours a day commuting, 2 hours to work, 2 hours back. It was stressful. It was expensive, all that gas. She ended up gaining a lot of weight because she didn't have time to make herself a home cooked meal. So she was eating, these Mexican food plates, which are huge. And she went to Germany, and she just she started living um, right next to the campus. So she was walking every day. And she was a student. She would make her own meals, and the transformation was like incredible. Within 2 months, she had lost all the weight she had gained over that time commuting. She just looked better. She was so much happier. And so, yeah, if you can orient your life to staying away from having to, well, not having to spend hours and hours in a vehicle, you're going to be happier. And it's also just better for your family too, because you spend more time with your kids. You can help them with their homework. And I know this one woman in Peru. She was losing 4 hours a day too commuting, and she didn't have time to cook her daughter, a meal. She didn't have time to help her daughter do her homework. Her daughter didn't do very well in school, and that becomes a social problem because kids, they don't learn like they should because they don't have somebody helping them with their homework, or helping have that healthy interaction with the parent. And so um, again, if you can live overseas, I would really try to do so. Try to orient your life where you're not having to you know use your car a lot to get things done.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, for Belize, that's a tough one, because everything is quite, even though it's a small country, everything is kind of spaced out, and you definitely do need a car. But luckily, it's not that big. Like you can get out of the country in a day driving, like in just like a few hours. It's really not that big. But you definitely, if you do want to get around, you definitely do need a car here.
But you can, but it's
But
probably you don't. Do you have terrible traffic jams and things like?
no,
Yeah, you see,
no,
that's
no.
the thing. See, it's
There's
like,
no traffic.
yeah,
No.
Lima is awful when it comes to traffic. I mean, it's just because they don't have any subways. And, like the government hasn't invested in subways, so that the roads are just completely saturated, and so it's you can't do anything in a vehicle and quickly. And so
Yeah. I
I
mean, I
mean,
think like in Belize, the pop, it's only like 400,000 people in the country. So, um, like that's how many people would be on the highway in in Toronto in rush hour traffic.
oh yeah,
probably more than
oh
that.
yes, oh yeah.
So that always helps too. There's just not a lot of people here to be to even have busy roads really. And then thing is, when there is like a little bit of a traffic jam, sometimes people just don't know what to do. They just lose their minds. It's pretty funny because it's just like they've never experienced anything like it, because you'll have some construction truck blocking the road or something, and because lots of development here at the moment. But yeah, it's that's great advice. Yeah, for sure. Right, a way to recapture your time. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, like my older daughter, she's now living in a little apartment right downtown Hamburg. It's got all the city right. She can walk to the pubs, to the market, the train station. It's a short walk away too. But she can also work remotely because she only has to go into work 2 times a week, I believe. And so, yeah, she's concentrating. She works her 8 hours a day. In Germany, she only has to work 8 hours. It's just not like in the U.S. where they tell you you're free. Your hours you're free to work as long as you come in anytime before 8 and anytime after 6 p.m. That's your freedom. You know, but
yeah.
in Germany, it's and so she's just living her life. She's always traveling. Every time I talk to her, she must have traveled to like 70 different European cities, and just really really enjoying her life. That's one of the great things about living in Europe. Of course, South America is also really interesting because you've got such a variety of terrain. You've got the Andes Mountains, you've got the Amazon rainforest, you've got the wonderful beaches. Even the deserts are fascinating. And
Hmm.
so Peru is like an explorer's paradise, and
Hmm.
so is Chile. And then I've heard great things about Paraguay. It doesn't have the mountains, but I hear it's a very affordable place and very pro business. The only
Mm-hmm.
places you really want to, I think, avoid are the places that have like an effectively a dictatorship, like Nicaragua or Venezuela. Things are pretty ugly in those countries, but
Mm-hmm.
Ecuador, for example, there's a wonderful city called Cuenca where a lot of people are retiring to. I haven't been there, but I hear it's beautiful. There are lots of really fun, interesting places that one can consider moving to or retiring to. You just have to kind of do a little bit of research. One thing I would like to see is, uh, well, getting a little bit into politics, is that if we didn't have this terrible failed drug war that we have, if it weren't the business that it is, a lot of these countries like Honduras, like El Salvador, like Guatemala, would actually be wonderful places to retire to. But because of all the drug related, the cartel related violence, you got to be really careful. Yeah, the thing is that you know President Nixon, who started this drug war, he was a smart guy, and he had to have known that the war against drugs would be about as successful as the war on alcohol was, of the prohibition. In other words, that doesn't go away. It just makes it the business of the gangsters and the criminals. And as long as there's economics behind it, it's going to be a business. It's going to continue to exist. And so the only way I see to take on this problem is to destroy the business model, and so that you can't make money on illicit drugs anymore. Once the business model is destroyed, then we could put our resources into tackling things like human trafficking. But the drug cartels, unfortunately, they do have so much power because they have so much money and they are so ruthless. And so that's one of the issues that I think needs to be addressed. And if and when it is, then a lot of these other countries in the region, Honduras, like I say, El Salvador, of course, El Salvador, I guess, is much better now. Guatemala, Nicaragua,
Mm-hmm.
and so hopefully, at some point, we can come up with a better way to approach the illicit drug issue in a way that enhances the environment in these countries, because they would be wonderful places to retire. The weather is good, affordable. The people are nice, and so this is something that I hope that I can help contribute to in the sense that if some of these ideas to take off about how we can approach the drug war differently, then a lot of these other countries would become great places to retire to too, or for tourism. Great
Mm-hmm.
places for tourism.
What's the approach for that? Because so when I drove down from Canada, and I
Oh,
had
you
a
did?
vehicle,
Wow.
a bus full of stuff. We sent a shipping container initially, but we have 2 young kids, so we had like cribs and stuff we needed to use immediately that we didn't want locked up in the shipping container. So I drove down with my 2 dogs and we came through Mexico. And I was classified as a transmigrante. I don't know if you know what that is, but for anyone who doesn't know, it's just there's like a classification of people here who come from Central America. They drive up to the U.S. through Mexico. They buy a bunch of like stuff. It often kind of looks like scrap goods and other type things, wrecked cars and appliances and that kind of stuff, and then they bring it back down to their home countries and refurbish the stuff and sell it. So I got deemed that, and I had to go through a different route than most people do for getting through the country, and it was just all cartel controlled. One of the main stipulations of essentially getting through was paying essentially like a bribe, and then putting a little sticker on the bumper of your vehicle to indicate that to like spotters along the road that you've done this process for them. But it's literally like you just crossed the border from the US, and before you get to the Mexican like official Mexican border, right? There's that kind of like no man's land along the Rio Grande, and it's just cartels. It's just the cartel guys, and they pull you over. They see all your import like paperwork, and they see everything you have, the value of everything, and and then you pay them the bribe money, and you're on their way. I mean, what do you do to like that's so deeply embedded into the government, to the point where like you literally like my customs broker printed out a copy of my paperwork for them. Like that's part of their process. They literally, I got a copy, the Mexican government got a copy, and the cartels got a copy. Right? It's like what? Like it's just part of. It's just like an arm of the government. I mean, what do you do
Right.
to get to like shoehorn them out? Right? I just don't.
Right.
It's it was just eye opening to me to be like, holy shit! And they're just out in the middle of the day along the roads, and nobody's hiding anything. And I mean, yeah, and I can only imagine if you're the right type of person with the right connections, you're bringing things through, right? Like they're ushering you through, whatever it might be. But yeah, I just thought it was crazy, and it just made me realize, like, holy crap! Like, this is like a massive issue, and it's like, what do you do to
Yeah.
to turn that around?
Yes, it's one of the reasons why we do have such a refugee crisis, is because the cartels, they control the police, they control the judges, they control the politicians, they control the armed forces. Who do you turn to? Who do you turn
Mm-hmm.
to? And if they come and knock on your door and say they want your son to work for the cartels, they want your daughter to service the cartels, oh, and by the way, they want 25% of whatever you earn. And if you don't agree that you're going to kill you. I mean, if we had a similar situation in the United States, and people thought the only way to escape it was to escape to Mexico, how we'd have an exodus to Mexico. It would be the exact same thing. And so, as long as this is such a fundamental problem that affects it affects us because of the the refugee crisis. The instability and the corruption that it causes is something that is affecting us as well. And the whole. I mean, also look at the effects of this drug war. I mean, I actually consider that I live in Portland, but I sure don't see the drug war being very effective. There are just lots of people with drug issues, and so bringing this back, that's just one thing you gotta be aware of. That when you want to go to a country, in this case south of the border, there's many wonderful opportunities, but you really better do your homework when it comes to understanding who's controlling what, because you don't want to get into a situation where you have finally your retirement home, but then the cartels come and they say they want part of your Social Security check every month, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they won't do that, but there's always exists that possibility.
Yeah. I mean, I will say the bribe money wasn't really a lot.
Oh, it wasn't? Well,
it was
good.
like $100 US or something like that I had to pay. But there was hundreds of people along the road, so they're making just tons of money just on that alone. It's crazy.
They probably have to get a kind of a balance. They don't want to get too much where lots of Americans start complaining, and then the U.S. government gets involved. The Mexican government tolerates it as long as they don't take it too far. If they really started.
Yeah, I mean, and this really doesn't, I wouldn't say, affect too many foreigners. Like, this was mostly, I was like literally only foreigner there in this sea of like thousands of essentially Central Americans. This is like, it's mostly Central Americans that do this this trip, essentially, right?
And then $100 might actually be a lot, for them.
Yeah, actually, that's true. I never really thought about it like that. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm. It has a lot more of an impact for them.
Yeah, especially if they're bringing stuff, secondhand goods that they might not be able to get a lot for. That could be pretty significant. I'm surprised they didn't charge you a lot more, actually. Being you.
Well, it's probably because I went through a proper channel. So they just charged me the regular process. I didn't get necessarily gringo taxed on that one. But trying to find that person it took me days. It took me 3 days to find someone that would do this paperwork for me. It had to be Spanish speaking customs broker. Yeah, it was, but I ended up going, using a connection from Belize, somebody that I met here, a Mennonite person who had done this trip numerous times with some consumer goods, like big items like a boat. But anyways, he had been kidnapped before and held for ransom. And I guess there's some sort of etiquette with the cartels that like you don't hold somebody for ransom more than once. So apparently this guy got picked up a second time, and after that he got like some sort of preferential treatment, and he got like some sort of inside connection, and he was able to, through sort of like a chain of. So I didn't know this person directly, but I knew someone that he knew. That's who I had met, and I contacted this person, and he gave me the contact of that guy, and then he gave me the customs broker's information. So it was a little bit of a kind of like a weird chain of events that kind of led to it. But it was a very interesting and eye-opening experience. So yeah, I mean that's another way, right? There's a lot of positives to living abroad, but there's also other sort of eye-opening experiences, right, that are maybe a little bit more shady and dark. But
it's just important, I think, to there are lots of great opportunities, but it's really important that you do your homework and and you hear things from different points of view, maybe not just in the tourist manual or whatever, but try to find out, what are some of the local, let's say, issues, for lack of a better word, that one might have to deal with. I think it's really important to really research it and and know what you're getting into.
Yep. So I recently read something. It was on Substack. It was somebody commenting. I guess they were expressing their frustration with like a lot of the foreigner abroad community, essentially encouraging people to leave and saying that's like your only option. And his point was like, well, a lot of people, that's just not an option. You can't leave. And that's fair. I mean, not everybody can afford it. Not everybody has that kind of that privilege. There is a privilege with being able to travel and live internationally. So for people who can't move abroad,
Mhm.
is there a way like for them to, in your opinion or in your experience, to like borrow international perspectives so that they can kind of like use it locally, like for themselves in their own community?
Well, one of the things that I tell people, I'm not sure if this will directly answer your question, but one of the things that I tell people is that I actually learned the majority of my Spanish in the United States because I started making so many friendships with people from the Latin community, and that was very enriching. That really helped me with, like I say, the language, the culture. You just meet new people. You get new opportunities appear. Like, for example, that's one of the ways I ended up in Peru, because I met some Peruvians, and then got to know them, and became fascinated with Peru. But this would not have happened had I not, proactively met people from that community. So if you live in a place where you there's certain concentration of people of a different culture, that's a good way to meet and to expand your own horizons. I think also, if you persevere, you can actually make things happen that you might think initially you can't make happen. So if you do have the dream of living overseas, okay, but you're kind of worried about resources, well, maybe you can figure out a way to, to move to a certain place, but to also, while you're there, make a living doing something that you like. For example, if you're, a personal trainer, maybe you can go and become a personal trainer teaching, helping people, you know, improve themselves physically, but doing so in English. You're distinguishing yourself from local personal trainers. You're actually helping people learn English while they're training.
Mm-hmm.
If you, this, in fact, I was recommending this to somebody who's thinking about living overseas, but they're also very into fitness. And I say, well, why don't you get a certificate to be a personal trainer and then go live overseas in a country where you can, kids are people who will pay good money to, to learn English. And you go to a place and you can combine it with the personal training. And
Mm-hmm.
this is just an idea, but if you can try to think of ways where you can take advantage of what skills you might have, and use those overseas, that can make it a lot easier. So you don't have to have a whole nest egg saved up before you go,
Yeah.
and a way that you can make a living doing something you enjoy, earn some money doing what you enjoy, and it's a great way to become a member of the community and make friends, make contacts.
That's a great point. And actually, the last guest, Brian Clark, he says something very similar, that you don't necessarily like, or a lot of people think like, oh, you can't just move abroad. And it's like, well, actually you can. What you can't do is get a job in a foreign country per se, right? Without
Right.
doing going through the proper channels. But if you can do something remote, um, then you can, as long as you have, and you don't need necessarily like a ton of money, to move abroad, provided that you have like a regular source of income. This has been fascinating conversation, Evan. Yeah, I would love. I had a whole list of questions. I don't even think I really got through most of them. We just kind of went with it, which is great. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate you coming on. Is there any kind of parting words you want to leave with the audience, or and then maybe where people can find a little bit more about you?
Well, yeah, I would just say, following the Nike slogan, just do it. Try not to let fear or vacillation get in the way. Try to, you know, move forward. Try to make these things happen. What really matters in life, I believe, are the richnesses of your experiences, not the amount of stuff you accumulate. So try to, you know, um, if you can, even if you're not going to be there your whole life, you're just going to be there for a short amount of time. A short amount of time being, hopefully at least a year. That'll be so eye opening. And so, not get discouraged. Discouragement is always the enemy. Just continue to be positive and continue to work toward that goal. And sooner or later, it'll work out. And so, perseverance and passion, I guess, are the key here. And so, yeah, you can find more about me at my website, which is just solutionsparty.org, which is exactly how it's spelled, solutionsparty.org. My email is there as well, which is just info@solutionsparty.org. And yeah, please write me regarding whatever you want, regarding living overseas or regarding any of the ideas on the website. And I welcome all points of view. Any question is on the table. Like I say, I believe very firmly in the diversity of our ideas, and I'm all ears.
All right, Evan. Thank you again.
Well, thanks.
And all the best. And
Thanks,
yeah, we'll catch up again on another episode.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again, Simo. Take
Right
care.
On. Bye.
Bye-bye. By the way, I'm sorry. I should have asked you. You pronounce your name Simo?
Yeah. Yeah.
Simo.
It's my name's actually Simon. It's just like a.
That's what
like
I figured.
Yeah. It's just like a little nickname, like a kind of pen name for. It started with like my Substack, and then I just kind of transitioned it into this, and I don't know, I just kind of stuck. So my wife and I came up with kind of like Belize nicknames when we moved here. So I became Jungle Simo, and she's Island Lily. Her first name's Lindsay. So we just kind of played around, and then it just kind of stuck. So, yeah, but yeah, it's Simo. Yeah.
Okay, because I knew it seemed like it was short for Simon, but I didn't think it was Simo. So I thought,
yeah,
it's probably Simo.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. All your language skills came in handy on that one.
Yeah, well, I can screw up somebody's name pretty badly too. So I'm glad I got this one right the first time. So
yeah, no, that's great. And then you pronounce your last name Jaqua, is that right?
Jaqua, that's correct. It's probably should be Jaqua because my ancestors were from France, but I don't want to give the impression that I speak French, so I say it as I was taught. Jaqua.
Yeah, that's like I have a French origin last name as well. It's Dauphiny, but it would normally have been like Dauphiné. And it used to have like we have two E's on the end, and it used to have like an accent aigu on the first E, but I think that was dropped. Like I don't know anybody on my even dad's side who ever spoke French. They came from France in like the 1770s or something like that, probably fleeing the
exactly
or something like that in France. But
I think it was, you might have been like my ancestors, Huguenots, who were escaping the religious wars between the Protestants and the Catholics. And I think there was a C between the A and the Q in my name, and that dropped somewhere, probably around Greenland. But yeah, probably, who knows? My ancestors and your ancestors might have even been neighbors who escaped, from France.
Yeah, interesting. Very cool.